A government plane just landed in Havana, the first one in 10 years. And the Cuban government didn't just allow it, they invited it. If you've been following this story, you know what that means. If you haven't, stay with me, because what happened in that room in Havana may determine the fate of 11 million people, and almost nobody is covering it correctly. 3 months ago, the Trump administration cut off Cuba's oil supply, not reduced, cut off. Venezuela's tankers stopped. Mexico's deliveries ended. The island of 11 million people is now running on backup generators, rationed electricity, and borrowed time. Hospitals are operating in the dark. Factories have gone silent. And the government that has resisted American pressure for 66 years just sat down at a table with the people applying it. That is not a small thing. That is a country signaling that it has run out of options. Here's what we know. A senior State Department delegation flew to Havana in late April 2026. Both governments confirmed it, but only after the officials had already left Cuban airspace. According to CNN, the American team delivered a direct message to Cuban officials. Time is running out to make key reforms before circumstances irreversibly worsen. That's diplomatic language. What it means in plain English is comply, or we let the collapse finish the job. The New York Times confirmed this was the first U.S. government aircraft on Cuban soil since March 2016, when Obama landed to open. Not close. This delegation came with something very different in mind. Washington laid 3 demands on the table. Release the political prisoners, the same people who would lead a democratic opposition. End political repression, meaning allow the speech, the press, and the civil society that 66 years of communist rule have systematically eliminated. And the most explosive demand of all, liberalize the economy. Open it to private enterprise. Open it to foreign investment. End the state monopolies that are the financial spine of the Communist Party's survival. Now here's what's critical. Those 3 demands are not a reform agenda. They are a dismantling agenda. If Diaz Canel says yes to all 3, he does not reform his government. He ends it. A Cuba with freed political prisoners, free speech, and a functioning private sector is not a Cuba the Communist Party controls for long. Washington knows this. Havana knows this. The diplomatic language just makes it easier to deny. Cuban President Diaz Canel responded publicly. He said Cuba is prepared to fight if the United States intervenes militarily. But here is the sentence that tells you everything. He said it while his government was simultaneously confirming participation in those secret negotiations. That is not defiance. That is 2 messages running in parallel, one for domestic consumption, one for survival. And a government sending 2 messages at the same time is a government that no longer has a single clear path forward. The Cuban Foreign Ministry called the American demands bad faith, reforms demanded while the blockade stays in place. Havana wants the oil flowing before they talk. Washington wants political change before the oil flows. That is not a negotiation. That is a standoff. And the island is the one running out of time. Cuba's GDP contracted nearly 8% in the first quarter of 2026 alone. That is not a recession. That is a depression-level collapse happening in real time. Food shortages are spreading. Public transportation is breaking down. Electricity is being rationed to a few hours daily in some provinces. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. Cuba imports roughly 90% of its fuel. When that fuel disappears, everything disappears with it. Not metaphorically, literally. Here is the military dimension that the headlines are quietly ignoring. U.S. Southern Command has increased its presence at Guantanamo Bay. Additional Marines and Special Operations Forces have been rotating through since February. The State Department delegation did not fly commercial. They used a government aircraft and made sure both governments acknowledged it publicly. That is not logistics. That is a demonstration. It is Washington saying, we can put assets on Cuban soil when we choose to. And Trump, when asked directly about military options, did not rule anything out. He said, and this is the part worth remembering, we have many options, and told reporters to watch what happens. That is the same phrasing he used before striking Iranian oil infrastructure in March. Not accidental, carefully chosen. Brian Fonka, a Cuba expert at Florida International University, told Bloomberg that the Trump administration is not betting on compromise. It is betting on collapse. And the fact that Washington sent a delegation at all suggests they believe Havana is closer to breaking than any public indicator has shown. The demands are designed to be unacceptable. The blockade continues either way. And the delegation's real function may not have been negotiation. It may have been documentation, creating the political and legal record that justifies whatever comes next. Cuba has survived American pressure before. It survived the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. It survived the special period. But every previous survival had an escape valve. The Soviets, then Venezuela, then limited Chinese engagement. Each time the pressure became unbearable, someone was there with oil. This time, no one is. Venezuela cannot help. China is sitting this out. Russia is sending words, not fuel. And a revolution that cannot move its trucks, power its hospitals, or feed its people is not a revolution. It is a countdown. And this is the question no analyst in Washington appears to be asking. What happens the day after Diaz Canel says yes? Or the day the regime collapses because he said no? There is no transition plan, no roadmap. The State Department has not offered one publicly. Libya after Gaddafi, Iraq after Saddam. In each case, the removal of an authoritarian system produced not stability but fragmentation. Cuba has 11 million people, collapsing infrastructure, 66 years of suppressed political tension, and no private sector, no independent judiciary, no civil society capable of absorbing a power vacuum. And there is a factor unique to this crisis that makes it more volatile than any of those comparisons. If Cuba collapses, people leave. They build rafts. They cross 90 miles of open water. The Mariel boat lift in 1980 brought 125,000 people to Florida in 6 months. If that happens again, and the conditions for it are being created right now, the numbers will be larger. And Trump, who built his political career on stopping migration, faces a migration crisis produced directly by his own pressure campaign. The pressure campaign is precise about forcing collapse. It is completely silent about what comes after. So here is where things stand today. A government plane landed in Havana. 3 demands were delivered that amount to a request for self-dissolution. Cuba's economy is in freefall. Military assets are repositioning. A second delegation is expected within weeks. And the question this entire situation has been building toward has still not been answered. Not by Washington, not by Havana, and not by anyone who claims to understand what comes next. Is this the end of the system that has governed Cuba since 1959? Or does it find another way to survive the way it has survived everything for 66 years? The answer depends entirely on something no analyst can predict: whether the officers whose loyalty keeps the system alive decide it is still worth keeping alive. We track this story every single day. If you want analysis that gives you what the headlines miss, hit subscribe. And hit it now, because the second delegation lands within weeks, and when it does, you'll want to already be here. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Where do you think this ends? Share this with anyone you know who is still treating Cuba as a Cold War relic. It is not. It is the most active regime pressure campaign in the Western Hemisphere right now, and the next move could come any day.